The Inspired Pilot Podcast, Episode 1.
Don't restrict yourself, be willing to move around, be willing to take that, what you might think is not a very good job. It's to someone else, it might be their dream job. So yeah, don't restrict yourself is what I say to most people.
Welcome to the Inspired Pilot Podcast with your host, Marvin Robinson. Inspiring stories from inspiring pilots from around the world.
Okay, welcome to the Inspired Pilot Podcast with your host, Marvin Robinson. Let's get started. Okay, I'm happy to introduce today's featured inspiring pilot, Mr. Matt Dearden. Matt, are you ready to inspire?
Hey, fair, Marvin.
Okay, after originally catching the flying bug as a teenage cadet, Matt Dearden switched working a normal 9-to-5 IT job in England to flying around the jungles of Indonesia in the ultimate bush plane. Not only is he a commercial pilot with thousands of hours in command of a Pilatus PC-6 aircraft with Suzy Air flying in the mountains of Indonesia, he is also a successful blog owner, a guest blogger, magazine column writer, and star of the recent Channel 4 docu-series Worst Place to Be a Pilot. Okay, I've given our listeners, the Inspired Pilots, just a little overview, Matt, so we can get to know you a little bit more. Take a minute, tell us a little bit about yourself personally, where you're from, and briefly what you're doing aviation and flying-wise now.
Okay, well, I'm obviously from England originally, but from about the age of 3 or 4, my parents moved out to the Middle East, and that's where I grew up, moving around from Saudi Arabia to Abu Dhabi and Bahrain, and kind of bouncing around with Dad's work. But I went to school in UK and subsequently university. All kind of, computer side of things is what I was looking at, and ended up in a pretty boring 9-to-5 job in Bristol. Along the way at school, I got a chance to fly with the cadets and was flying the Bulldogs, which just awesome little airplanes. And what was in the back of my mind, I just thought, yeah, it'd be kind of cool to fly these things. But obviously my eyesight prohibited me from doing the RAF or anything like that. So I just kind of put it in the back of my mind and just carried on with the computers. But yeah, as I said, I got into this 9-to-5 in Bristol there, and that just got very boring after a few years. So I thought, yeah, well, why not learn to fly? And yeah, from about the second lesson, I was like, yeah, that's it. I'm going to see how far I can take this. And yeah, here I am a few years later out in Indonesia. Currently, I'm flying the Pilatus PC-6 𝗘𝗶𝗍𝗆 right in the mountains of Papua, which is, if you know where Australia is, and you kind of know where Singapore is, it's sort of in between there. And it's one of the best jobs in the world. I absolutely love it. It's sort of ticks all the boxes from sort of adventure lifestyle and some of the best flying you can ever do, really. Yeah, I love it out here.
Fantastic. Whereabouts did you do your initial training?
I learned to fly in Filton, actually, Bristol, before it got closed, with Aero's Flying Club, which is based out of Gloucester, actually. But they had a sort of satellite base in Filton, which was real handy because it was about 15 minutes away from my office, so I could sort of bunk off a little bit early sometimes and go flying, which was fantastic. That was the 𝗣𝗶𝗆 side of it. And then commercial side of it, I actually went to Bristol International Airport itself with Bristol Flying School, as it was then. And yeah, I went through the whole rigmarole there, again, which is very convenient because it was 15 minutes away from my parents' house. So it made life pretty easy.
As a private pilot myself, by the time I passed my skills test, the Filton closure was almost there and didn't really get round to landing there. So yeah, definitely a big regret of mine. Okay, so let's jump into the next topic, challenges.
Okay.
On the Inspired Pilot podcast, we delve into the journey of our featured inspiring pilot, which is you today, Matt. So for all pilots, flying inherently has its own challenges, but no more so than during the initial training. Take us back to a time in your life, especially during the initial training. What did you find challenging and how did you overcome this?
I guess certainly flying in the UK, the weather was probably one of the biggest challenges, and trying to get some sort of currency going, because you'd sometimes be weeks between flying lessons just because, you could only book 1 or 2 slots a week kind of thing, and they'd often get cancelled, obviously particularly in winter. I do remember finding that pretty frustrating. And obviously there's sort of crosswind limits and all this kind of stuff. And so many times it was, cancelled lesson. And yeah, I guess it taught me a lot of patience, was probably the biggest thing, which, to be honest, as I've been progressing as a professional pilot, it's something you've had to kind of deal with the whole time, really, because there's always frustrations with flying in any field of it.
And I guess when you move into the commercial side, there's more at risk, more at stake as well. So I guess your level of patience must increase over time.
I mean, it's certainly that, but and also just living out in the third world, it's very far removed from the sort of clockwork precision of England. So yeah, you sort of have to sort of deal with, oh, it's a power cut, okay, fair enough. All the passengers haven't showed up today, so right, we'll move that charter back a little bit, and just lots of little things like that, which you just have to deal with day to day. So yeah, patience was definitely a big thing. Fantastic.
How many different aircraft have you flown to date, and which of these aircraft do you hold to your heart, and why?
I think it's something like 9 or 10 different types at the moment, so not too many, but enough to kind of give a bit of variety. I really enjoyed the 𝗘𝗶𝗴𝗰𝗆 actually during my CPL training. It was fantastic etiquette, 200 horsepower turbo engine, and it just went like a rocket ship. It was probably one of the fastest planes I've flown, certainly the GA kind of types. But yeah, obviously the Spitfire was pretty epic. That was a seriously privileged thing to get to do that out of Goodwood. It'll take some beating with that one, but yeah, I mean the Pilatus Porter is right now I'm so at home with that plane. I have thousands of hours in that one now, and to be honest, when I step into another type, it's always a bit of almost like beginning to learn to fly again. You're just kind of, everything's everywhere, particularly when you're going back to piston engines. It's like, ooh, magnetos and all this. So, yeah, I mean, I guess sort of those three were kind of the top ones, really.
I think that's crazy. It's like Spitfire, Porter, Arrow. An eclectic collection of aircraft there. Fantastic. I've got to admit, from watching you fly, from your videos on your blog, indopilot.blogspot.com, and obviously from the TV show, the Channel 4 TV show, you do look like that plane is your baby, and you are one, and you look exceedingly comfortable in that. So yeah, I totally agree with what you say, and from what it looks from the outside anyway. Let's look to current activities there. So let's tell us about your current flying and what you're excited about now.
Well, I mean, my sort of career out in Indonesia has been quite progressive, to be honest. And I'm really thankful for that one. I mean, I started with sort of 230, 240 hours, something like that. So it's sort of fresh out of flying school, really. And that was into the right seat of a Cessna Caravan as a co-pilot. I did that for a year, which was a fantastic learning experience. It taught me a lot about flying in Indonesia, flying a much bigger type, obviously a turbine engine and all this sort of thing, before obviously then being upgraded to the left seat and captaincy. And again, it was another kind of progression up from that, and it was great being in command, and I really relish that nowadays. I think I'd struggle to go back to a co-pilot seat, but maybe one day it might happen. But all the time, after I did a little tour of Papua very early on, I saw the Pilatus Porters, and I got in the right seat of those a few times, just flying with the guys. And I thought, yeah, this is definitely what I want to have a go at, and just sort of made a beeline for it, really. So after a couple of years out in Indonesia, I got the chance and jumped on it, and never looked back.
Going from the Caravan, and you wanted to jump into the left-hand seat, what was that? Just you just wanted to be in command, or was it the type? What was the type of flying? What was it? The aircraft, the type of flying? What drove you to want to fly the Porter?
Well, I mean, moving over to the sort of left seat of the Caravan, everyone wants to be pilot in command. It's the extra kind of responsibility. You're the ultimate decision maker, and all that sort of side of it, which I guess, I don't know, from a sort of selfish point of view, I quite like takeoff and landings, and sort of having to share with someone every time is always a little bit like, But yeah, with the Porter, obviously it's single pilot, so I have to do everything myself. No different to GA flying back in UK. Right now with the Porter, I'm actually based in a little town called 𝗟𝗶𝗴𝗰𝘆, which is sort of on the northern coastline of the Papua island. And from here, it's a kind of intermediate base. It's a step up from what I have been doing before, but it's not like a sort of the absolute top tier. which is what a few of the other guys have been doing. And I love it. It's every day. It's very varied. We're sort of flying to maybe 5 or 6 different destinations every day within sort of 20 minutes, half an hour hops away. I find cruise very boring, so it's quite nice to be able to sort of take off a little bit of cruise and then obviously try and land it on the side of a mountain, which that never gets boring, to be honest. And yeah, I absolutely love it. It's the best job in the world.
I can imagine. You mentioned that there are some other crews doing the top tier. What's the difference between what they're doing and what you're doing now? So obviously you're doing the little hops. What's the top tier as you described it?
I think the top tier is what we call our 𝗏𝗏 base, which is right in the center of the heartlands. It's a fairly sizable airport, but it's surrounded by hundreds of little airstrips, which are being constructed all the time. And so quite a lot of that kind of flying is landing somewhere that no one's ever landed before. I think if anyone watched the TV series, they probably saw George doing that very thing. First aircraft into a place. And whilst I've done that a couple of times, you do it a lot more out of 𝗏𝗏. And yeah, obviously that's, added kind of risks involved with doing that. And yeah, I think ultimately, probably sometime next year, I might step up to that one.
Fantastic. At least there's definitely a career progression. God knows where you go after that, though.
Yeah, that's it. I think that is as high as it gets, really, when it comes to bush flying, probably.
Okay, so from an outsider, I think you were definitely one of the stars of the worst place to be a pilot. How was that experience for you with the filming, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, that was certainly a unique experience. I've never been on telly before, and certainly never done any kind of filming stuff like that, other than just my own little videos. I suppose the biggest thing was repetition, lots and lots of repetition. It was actually very small teams. They only had 3 teams throughout Indonesia, which would be one cameraman and one kind of director kind of guy, who would also be a cameraman as well occasionally. And they just sit in the right-hand seat and just ask you questions the whole time. And sometimes the same question over and over in different locations, different times. And I guess they're kind of waiting for you to sort of say, the most, the scariest or dangerous thing, But it was quite good fun, actually, Neil. I quite enjoyed it as a whole. There were moments which were a bit like, I'm kind of done with it today, so let's just turn the cameras off and we'll go home. But no, I think it was a good thing to do. And the best thing was really that now I can kind of show everybody back home, friends and family, what we really get up to out here. Because obviously I got the blog and things, but it's never quite as professional as something like a TV show. So yeah, I enjoyed it on the whole. Okay,
and how has life changed since the show aired, especially in the UK? Obviously, you just mentioned your family and friends can now see what you're actually doing. But, are you getting fan mail, getting recognised in the street when you've been back in the UK?
Well, I only been back the one time since the show actually aired, and I did get recognised a couple of times, which is a pretty random experience. But and not even in like airfields, just in sort of, I think, Waterloo Station. I was just sitting in a pret-a-manger having a coffee, and this English fellow pops up and he's like, "You work for 𝗖𝗍, don't you?" And I was like, "Yes." He's like, "Oh, I was just watching you on TV last night." And it was amazing. And it was all very awkward in a very British way. Aside from that, though, it's been very nice for Flyer magazine pick me up, actually, and obviously I wrote quite a big article for them, and a lot of photographs, and after that they've taken me on as a columnist as well now. So it's quite nice to sort of have a little expanded repertoire.
Exactly. So you've got your new column in the Flyer magazine, and it's definitely not your first writing gig, because your blog, indopilot.blogspot.com, that's been going for a long time. You've got a lot of followers, and in terms of interaction, in terms of comments on individual posts, it's quite amazing how much engagement you've actually had. So there's definitely a big following and a big fan base following you. So definitely a writing career is brewing. Yeah, which is, it's pretty ironic, really. If you spoke to my English teacher when I was about 14 or 15, I don't think they would have envisaged that one. But no, the blog's been really good, actually. I started that pretty much when I started on the Porter about 3 years ago. And it took quite a while to get going, but it kind of gained momentum kind of before the TV show, really. But obviously since then, it's kind of snowballed a little bit. But it's great, actually. It's very cool. Like, I get people writing to me, and you've sort of
he just said, "Oh, I was thinking about flying, and now I've seen your blog, and I've gone for it. I'm going for the CPL. Any advice and all this kind of thing." And it's a sort of, it's quite rewarding, really.
Absolutely fantastic. So, in terms of the proudest flying moment, so what is your proudest flying moment in your career so far? Tell us that story.
That's a kind of tricky one because there's quite a few, really.
I can imagine.
I mean, obviously, I think when I got command on the Pilatus Porter was probably one of the proudest. That was, I don't know, there's something about sort of being sent solo off into the mountains, obviously after all the training and everything. That first kind of flight with the sort of PAP winds into that first mountain airstrip, it was, your heart's kind of going in a little bit, and, you're hoping the weather's going to be good, and, and that was, really cool when looking back on that. And it's never really got boring, even though I do the same thing every day now. It's a very rewarding job, and it's, I love it.
You can definitely tell that. So you mentioned there's a tier up from where you are now, but what's long term? I think you sort of alluded to in the TV show that where you are at the moment doesn't support a family lifestyle. I'm not sure whether I might edit this out just in case you don't want it aired, all right?
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. There was actually a married guy in that program who was struggling or it was, difficult away from family and wife and children, etc. What are your future plans, sort of flying wise, your future aspirations? No longing to fly the big tin?
I mean, certainly the big stuff is just no interest to me at the moment anyway. I would never say never, I suppose. I mean, you could never really shut down all the doors, but I would find it very unlikely that I'd fly something like that. I think particularly after doing this sort of flying, I would find that very tedious, kind of like my old office job. But you never know. I mean, I might get a little bit older and a little bit wiser and decide that's a sensible thing to do. But no, I mean, right now, I still very much enjoy the flying here, and I haven't got that bug out of me. So it would be very hard to walk away from this. I honestly couldn't say what would tempt me away. I look at things. I think maybe something like a King Air, or maybe a Pilatus PC-12, or even like a small little biz jet or something, like a Citation. Sort of charters, medevacs, that sort of thing. Something with a bit of variety, I think, is probably what would, be the sort of thing I might move on to after this. And yeah, a little bit more settled perhaps, because obviously out here it's quite a nomadic kind of lifestyle. But we do get a lot of holidays, which is quite good as well. But
very important.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we'll see what the future holds. I'm not ruling anything out, but at the moment, I'm happy enough here.
Very powerful stuff. I just can't stop smiling, to be honest, because I do think you've actually got the best job in the world, and I'm just smiling myself. Okay, Matt, we've now reached my favourite part of the show, which is the quick-fire checklist. This is where I ask you a series of questions and you come back to us, inspired pilots, with amazing and inspiring answers. How does that sound?
Alrighty, we'll see what we can do.
Okay. What is the best piece of advice related to flying that you've ever received?
Definitely the best one I had was actually when I was first training on the Porter. My instructor, having finished all the training, he said to me, have a comfort zone and, try and stay within that, but don't be afraid to step outside of it occasionally. And that's a piece of advice I've taken to heart, really. And it's very true in all manner of flying, I think, not just in what I do out here. But, obviously you don't want to be risking everything, but don't be afraid to just step outside the comfort zone occasionally, just to expand your repertoire, really. Otherwise you'll just sort of stagnate. So, yeah, that's the one I've been using most recently.
A mere Cessna 182 pilot can relate to that totally. Do you have a favourite internet flying resource that you'd like to share with the listeners?
When I've got the internet actually working, I quite like looking on the forums, really, like the flyer forums. They're always a good sort of thing, just to keep in touch with GA back and home in UK, really. I don't post a lot, but it's always good to have a read of that one.
Can you share one of your personal habits that you believe contributes to your flying success?
Gosh. I have to think about this. Hang on.
This is a tough one.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a few things which are very particular to what I do out here. I'm not really sure, but they wouldn't relate at all to anything back in UK.
Go for it.
Okay, well, I'll go with that one then. Yeah, I suppose the thing I kind of use most out here is obviously we've got a lot of challenging weather, and it's not unusual to end up at an airstrip which is maybe sitting in the clouds, or it's just the weather's kind of washing through it quite a few times. And what I'll always do is I'll start a timer when it's like that, and I'll give myself zero point 0.2 of an hour, 12 minutes. Watching the weather, maybe just fly overhead the airfield, keeping visual, obviously. You don't want to be flying in the clouds at those kind of altitudes. And then, after 12 minutes, if I can't make a successful, safe landing, I'm probably going to start doing something stupid. So, that's the point to get out of there and go back home. That's certainly kept me alive a few times.
Very good. I like that answer. Matt, trikes or tail draggers? I think I know the answer to this one.
Trikes, obviously. No. It's got to be tail draggers on that one.
Can you recommend one aviation-related book?
The last good book I read aviation-wise was a book called Lost in Shangri-La by Michael Zuckoff, which is it's a story of a DC-3 which crashed towards the end of the Second World War out here in Papua. And it's all about the sort of their survival and the sort of rescue mission to get them out, which it's one of the most harebrained and crazy schemes anyone's ever come up with. And it's absolutely fascinating read, not just from sort of historical point, but just the aviation kind of wide, the way they get them out. It's fascinating and well worth a read.
Fantastic. Inspired Pilots, you can get the audio version of this book or a book just like it by going to inspiredpilotbook.com. That's inspiredpilotbook.com. What is your favorite non-essential but essential to you technology gadget in your cockpit?
Some people probably guess this one, but it's my Breitling Emergency, which I never fly without that one. I'm a bit of a watch geek, always have been. As soon as I sort of was able to afford that thing, which it's not a cheap thing, I had to have it. And I wear it every time I go flying out here, because it's obviously got the ELT built into it, which might very well save my life one day. Who knows? Hopefully, I'll never have to find out. But it's nice to have it.
And it will look absolutely fantastic on your wrist.
Thanks.
If you had a time machine and you can go back in time and meet your younger self, young Matt, just as you were about to start your flying journey, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
I think considering where I've ended up now and the kind of flying I enjoy doing and see myself doing in the future, I would probably tell myself, don't waste all your money on that GAA EASA license. Just go to the States and get an 𝗣𝗂𝗴𝗰𝗆, which costs you half as much money. You've done it much quicker, a lot less stress, and you'd still be out here flying, the best aircraft in the world. So, I think that would be my advice to myself.
I can imagine that the whole of the UKGA now are now screaming at you. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Matt. Okay, Inspired Pilot, you can find all the links to all the resources and everything else we've been talking about in today's episode by going to the inspiredpilot.com and search for Matt in the search bar to find the show notes for this episode. Hi, Matt. I've really enjoyed listening to your journey, and the stories you've shared are really inspiring personally, and I'm sure the listeners are going to think the same. Can you give us one last piece of guidance for our audience of Inspired Pilots? Share how people can get in contact with you, and then we'll sign off. Okay.
The piece of advice I give to a lot of people, actually, obviously I get a lot of emails and people contact me, asking how do they get out here? How do they, how do I get into this kind of job? And I think the way I got here was mainly because I was very open. I was happy to take any flying job anywhere in the world, flying any kind of airplane. And I think a lot of people they've got their focus set on, flying the Airbus or the Boeing or whatever it is. And that's all they want to do. And everything else is an inconvenience. And then they just moan about the lack of jobs and everything else. And, I think if you just, I know it's not easy to get jobs out in any kind of aviation field, but don't restrict yourself, be willing to move around, be willing to take that, what you might think is not a very good job, but to someone else it might be their dream job. So don't restrict yourself is what I'd say to most people.
Sounds like a fantastic bit of advice there. And how can people contact you?
I'm obviously I'm on all the sort of social things, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. If you just search for Indo Pilot, which is all one word, you'll find it on any of those kind of platforms. And obviously the blog where it all began, indopilot.blogspot.com.
Matt, thank you for being so generous with your time. I know you're traveling soon. So on behalf of the Inspired Pilots, thank you and speak to you again. Goodbye.
Yeah, thanks very much, Marvin. Pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Inspired Pilot podcast. Don't forget to head over to inspiredpilot.com. That's where you'll find the show notes for every episode, links to all the resources mentioned, and much, much more. Wherever you are on your pilot journey, get ready to be inspired.